This is part 4 of a series of videos on how to create a multi-user chat application. So in the first 3 parts, we created a protocol for communicating with the client. So we have commands such as log in, log off. We're able to publish the presence of a user when they log in to other users using online and offline commands. In the last part, which is part 3, we worked on supporting direct messages and group messaging, right, from different users to different users. And up until now, we've been using a Telnet to replicate what the client behavior should be, right? So let me show you how to use the Telnet to connect to our server, right? So we can use Telnet localhost, and then the port is 8818. I have 2 connections. So once these are connected, the first thing I have to do is to log in as someone. So in this first Telnet session, I'm going to log in as a guest with the password guest. And then on the lower second Telnet session, I'm going to log in as Jim with the password Jim. Right. So once I log in, this first one will get a presence that Jim is online, right? Which that happens. And at the same time, when this Jim gets online, we also get a notification that guest is already online, right? So here, this is how our presence is working. We're going to use this presence to build our client roster, basically of all the people that are currently available online that you can chat with, right? And then you can also send messages to a user by just using the command message and then followed by the login and then the message. Right, so you can see that the top part received that message. So what we're going to do in part 4 is to work on the client-side library that is used to facilitate the communication between the client and the server. Okay, so to begin, we're going to work on this chat client module that we created in part 1. Right now it doesn't have anything, so let's create a new class. We're going to create a class called chat client, and this is going to be the interface to the server. Okay, so we're going to create a main class for a test, and then the way that we want to use the chat client is to create an instance of this client, and we can then pass it the host, which right now is going to be our local host, and then the port. Okay, so let's create this constructor. And then this will be our server port. Okay. So we just remember these 2 as the field members. Okay, so once we create an instance of this client, we want to connect. We want to be able to establish a connection to the server. So in order to make a connection to the server, we have to create a socket. Okay, and in the socket, okay, so the parameters to a socket is basically going to be the host and then a port. And so here, since we're already passing the server name and the server port in the constructor, right, we're going to use that here. And then here, once so if we have any exceptions, let's make this one return a Boolean if it's connect successfully or not. So if any exceptions, we're going to return false. Otherwise, we're going to return true. Okay, and what I want to do is I also want to make this socket a field so we can access it in other methods. Okay, so once we create the socket, we can then access the input stream and output stream to be able to read and write to the server. All right, so here I'm going to say server out as my output stream, and then my server in as my input stream. All right, so just to okay, so let's test this. So here, if I do that, I can then print out a message. Okay, so now let's run it. Okay, and then I think we should also print out if it's successful. Okay, let's run it again. Okay, and here you go. So it says connect successful. So that's working the way that we expect. And then also, let's see if the server prints out anything, right? So here, right? So here you see this accepted the connection. One thing that I also want to point out is that we can actually figure out which port this client socket is using, right? We can do that by printing out the client port. This local port. Okay, so now if we run this chat again, right, the client port is 60258, right? And on the server, you can see here this port is 60258. So this is the client port, and this is going to be the server port. Okay, so that's just a little bit about how we use sockets. Okay, so after we connect, if we are successfully connected, right, then we would want to log in, right? So when we log in, we want to log in as a user and password. So in this case, I'm going to use guess. Okay, so here this is going to be our login. This is our password. Okay, so what we want to do is to replicate what we've done here, right? So this telnet is basically same as creating our client socket. Okay, and then once we do that, what we want to do is we want to log in. So what we want to do is we want to issue a command such as login guess to the server. Okay, and then in response, we're going to expect to have either okay login or if we log in as invalid user, right, we're going to say error and then login. So login is actually the command they're trying to execute. So let's issue this login command. Okay, so the command that we want to send to the server is going to be login, and then followed by the actual login, and then password, and then finally a new line to separate that command. And what we want to do is we're going to send this command to the server. So that means we have to use the server out right. Okay, and then this one needs some exception handling, right? And so once we write out the login, we also need to read the response. All right, but for now, let's test to see if we actually send the data to the server and see if the server receives that data. Okay, so let me clear out the server output. And then we run this server, right? Here it says user login successfully. Guess, right? So that means this login was successful. And what we want to do is, so let's try this. Right? So let's say we log in with a bad password and see what happens. Right, so let me clear this output. Let me run this again. And then here we don't really see any messages. That means we didn't log in successfully. Right, so let me make this more clear on the server. Okay, so on the server we have this handle login. Right, and in here, if we successfully log in, we're going to say OK login, but we didn't print out anything. Right, so here we basically so that's what we want to do. So then now if we restart the server and then we restart the client, you will see here login fail for guess. Okay, so now let's go back to the client. Right, so once we're successfully log in, right, we also want to read the next line. It should be either be this error login or it says OK login. Right, so let's read that. And in order to read that, we basically have to use the server in input stream. Right, so to make it easier for us, we're gonna create a buffer reader, which we can use to read line by line. Right, and we're gonna use it. We're gonna create a buffer input stream as create a field called buffered in. And here in this login, we're gonna read a line from the server. Okay, and then let's print out what that response looks like. Okay, so now if I restart this, okay, so the response line is here, OK login. Okay, so let's make this, actually this should be print line, right? So make it more format friendly. Okay, so here, right, it's connect successful, and then the next line should be OK login. Okay, so now if our response is right, we're going to return true, else we're going to return false. And then we're going to make this login return a boolean. Okay, so here now in my main, if I test for this login, so now let's restart it. Okay, so here it says login successful. So what happens when we use an incorrect password? Oh, so it says login fail. Okay, so let's go back to the successful case. So that's that, right? And okay, so that's basically covers, you know, connecting and also logging in. Right, so next thing that we want to do is to create an API for detecting presence. Right, so basically when a user comes online, Right, so if I log in as guest, and then here, since I'm the only user, I don't receive any notification that anybody's online. But once I log in as somebody else, or somebody else connects to the server, right, you're gonna see that it's gonna be showing this online guest, right? I think the reason why this is not working is because, the reason why we have more than one guest is because we didn't properly log out, right? And the server right now doesn't detect any connections that are that are disconnected without having to issue. Because right now, what happens is the server right now still thinks guest is connected because each of those connections didn't log out properly, right? And right now, the server doesn't detect any network disconnects. Right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to restart the server to clean up everything. Right, and then right, so if I log in as Jim here, and when I log in as somebody else, right, each one of these users will get a message from the server that says who's online. So if you're Jim, you're going to see the guest is online. If you're a guest, you're going to see Jim is online. So you're going to see the other party online. So what we're going to do right now is going to add a way to listen for the online and offline messages from the server. Right. So let's start with creating an interface. Right, I'm going to say user status listener. And this listener just has two methods, right? One is for online, to notify when a user comes online. And then the next one is going to be offline, to notify when a user goes offline. And in this chat client, we're going to allow a different code to be able to register multiple user listeners to this chat client. All right, so we're going to have a list of listeners, right? And we also need to have a method that other components can register the listener to this chat client. And then also we need to be able to remove the listeners. Okay, so what we're doing is basically to then now have, so what we're doing right now is to add a user status listener, right? So in this case, before I log in, I want to register all my listeners, right? So let's do that. Yeah, so here, before I do anything, I want to add a user listener. Okay, and then here, once we get a callback for who's online, we can then just output it. We can say online, and then the login. And likewise, we do the same thing for this offline. Right, so we're going to say offline. Okay, so next, what we're going to do is once we successfully log in, right, we're going to start to receive events from the server. Okay, so what I want to do is after I log in, then I want to start reading responses from the server, right? So let's create a method called start message reader. And so this message reader is going to just create a new thread. And in that thread, right, it's gonna execute this read message loop. So at this point, we're able to log in, and then once we log in, we want to start reading events from the server. So events can be online or offline, right? Could be these online or offline messages. Also, it could be messages from other users or from a group message. Okay, so let's start with that, right? So basically, in the login, right after we successfully log in, we're gonna start this message reader, and then the start message reader is really just gonna kick off another message loop reading, right? By scheduling that in a separate thread, right? So now the actual work is actually in this read message loop. So this loop is going to be an infinite loop that will read line by line from the server output. So the server output is going to be our client input. Okay, and here I'm just gonna surround this with a exception. All right, so any exception that occurs here, we'll print it out. And then also we will then close that socket. Okay, so just like what we did on the server side, we have the server worker, which also has a loop. Right, which is here, right? We want to do the same thing. So then we want to split this token and then check to see if that, and then also this. Okay, so we basically want to do the same thing, right? And so the first thing we want to handle is the offline and online presence messages. And so this is coming from the server. So if it's online, right, it is the command. Okay, so in here, what we're going to do is we're going to call back all the user status listeners, call the online method of all the registered user status listeners. Right, so we know that the login is going to be the next token. Right, so in this case, we're going to say and then so we want to handle the offline message. We can pretty much do the same thing. Okay, and the offline is pretty much the same thing, except that we're going to call this offline. Okay, so let's see how that works. Okay, so again, in the main, we already registered this one user status listener, right, to this client, which when these two methods are called, it will print out the appropriate message for debug purpose. Okay, so here's this online gym, which is our current session, but let's restart everything just for clean, to make it clean. And then here we don't have anything, but now when I log in as Jim here, because in this client we log in as guest, right? So when I log in as Jim in the Telnet, I should be able to see myself, or you should see the online message for Jim. So which is true, right? So that's how we can handle this online offline. So let's say if I quit, I should see a offline Jim message, which is okay. So that's also good, right? So that's how we can process the online and offline message presence. Okay, so in this video, I just show you how to create the chat client, right? And then we started working on the chat client by just being able to log in and also listening for online and offline presence messages from the server. So for completeness, I want to add also the log off command to the client, right? So what I want to do is I want to be able to say client log off at the end, right? So this should be very trivial if you're following, right? So basically, okay, so this log off command is just going to send a log off command to the server, right? That's all it's going to do. Okay, so now that we handle the login, log off, and the presence messages, okay, let's go ahead and handle the direct messaging. Right, so as we said before, when we want to send a message, we're going to send this message command or command line, right? So the first token is going to be a message, followed by the user, and then the message body. Okay, so let's create a function that can do it for us, that will do that for us. Okay, so let's, as a test, let's do, say, message, and then we're gonna the login of the recipient of the message, and then that's what we want to accomplish. Right, so let's actually create this message. And so this is going to be the who to send the message to and the message body. Right. Okay, so that's how we're going to send a message to another user. All right, so let's see if that is going to work for us. So when we start the server, and then in order for us to send a message, I have to log in as that user that's going to receive the message. So login. Okay, so now if I start that, yep, so you can see here, right, I got a message from guest, and that message says hello world, right? Now I can send back a message to the guest, but then also we need to be able to receive that message and create a listener for that message, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another interface. I'll call it message listener. And so this will be an interface. And this interface will just have one method, and on message, and then from login, and then the message body. Okay, so whenever somebody sends you a message, basically what happens is the other user will send the message to the server, and then the server will relay that message to the targeted user, and in this case you will be the targeted user. So when we receive that message from the server, we're going to call this on message callback, right? And then also once we parse the message, we'll be able to figure out who that message is coming from, and also what is the body of that message. Okay, so now in this right here, I'm just going to create an array of messages. Okay, and likewise, I'm also going to have a way to add and remove message listeners, which is similar to what we're doing here. Okay, so as a test, I'm going to add a message listener to my client instance when I first started. Okay, so I'm gonna say you got a message from, and then the login. Okay, so that's what we're gonna print out. It says you got a message from, and then the sending login, and then also then the message body. Okay, so now in our message loop that we're reading from the server, we'll handle this command. Okay, so likewise, back in the server worker, right, when we receive a message, we actually don't want to split every token. We only want to split the first 3 tokens. Right, so we're going to do the same thing here. Okay, and then instead of using the tokens, we're going to use our own version of those tokens. All right, so that means that the login is going to be, and then the message body is going to be the next token. Right, so the reason why we use that way of parsing is because we want all the rest of the tokens that are past number 3 to be included to the third token. And then now we're just going to call all the message listeners and call the on message function, and then pass it the login and then the message body. Okay, so let's see if that works. Okay, so what happens is right now we just terminate, and I believe that is because of this log off right here, right? So we don't want to log off, because once we log off, it's going to terminate the connection, and then that message loop is going to terminate as well, right? So we want to right now don't log off. Okay, so here we're still running, right? So now I can send a message to guest. Yep, there you go. So when I send a message from the Telnet, I'm able to receive it using the client chat API. Okay, so that's how we're going to create the client-side API. And in the next video, we'll look at creating a Java GUI that can use this client API to create a more visual interface for our chat, for our multi-user chat program. Okay, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.